So on web scraping itself, what we're doing essentially, and you can hear that scraping part, is that we are trying to get information. Oh my gosh, I misspelled this. It's gonna drive me crazy, guys. Okay. Cool. So web scraping basically is that we're trying to get information off of a website, and you can hear that scraping part. Like it's dirty work. You're trying to get the juicy stuff, the interesting things off there. Versus you can see here, look how simple this web page looks. Google is probably like one of the simplest web pages you could probably look at. That's like a big stuff. And look at all this stuff. There's so much information, and most of it's hidden. So you can see that like basically you need to have some way. If you were to go in here yourself and try to find each individual part, looking for just like the logo, or just like you're looking for just this guy right here. Imagine trying to look for just this part and see how it changes every single day. You would have to figure out how to do this. And you can see here, there's a different little tag right here. In this case, it's a class of something, something, middle slot promo. So note that that's basically how you can get information, okay? So kind of going really quickly, web scraping, like I mentioned before, I like to say is that this is like the hierarchy. This is by in no terms official in any way. This is more like my opinion and the way I kind of think of things is that for the most part, direct access is kind of like some database or CSV, like I said, like a SQL database or importing a file. Then we have API calls, which, you know, okay, like we don't have to get it all ourselves, but at least, you know, we have to get in JSON format and turn to tabular data. It's like, well, okay, it's not the worst thing in the world. And then scraping data is probably like in the sense like, okay, now we got to go down and dirty. We have to go get all the information ourselves essentially. And then other sources, like I said, is probably just like going to like a survey. Like, I don't know, like pretty much after, if you can't scrape the data at that point as data scientists for big data, you kind of tend to throw up your hands like, well, let me go find somewhere else. You know, I think we talked about like Naked Statistics, that book that was recommended. At the very, very beginning, talks about, you know, doing surveys. Data scientists don't have time for surveys. We're not going to form our own survey. We're going to go get it from somewhere else, right? We want a large amount of data. We don't want 100, 1,000 different data points. We want hundreds of thousands of data points if possible. And that's why we scrape data, okay? Or do an API, okay? Cool. So that's kind of like the reason why we do web scraping. So let's actually do some web scraping. So, but before I go into this, talking about like the DOM of the object, we'll call it DOM, right? Which is basically the document object model, which is basically HTML, how it's structured. And you can hear this terminology, siblings, children, descendants. You can think of basically within itself, for example, you might have this as being the parent, and this would be the child, for example, or if something's at the same level. So if I kind of minimize this, is that this would be the parent. And since these are both children of that parent, they would be siblings. Oh, how cute, right? You can also hear it as like nodes and stuff like this too, or roots. But for the most part, you know, just know that's the terminology for web scraping, or just talking about the DOM itself. But before I talk about like how we scrape this, one kind of fun fact about websites is that some websites don't like to be scraped. Does anyone have an idea what websites don't want to be scraped?
Amazon?
Amazon, yep, Amazon does not want to be scraped. They want all their information for themselves, right? Couple other places, anyone got an idea?
Bank websites?
Bank websites, for the most part, you probably don't have to worry too much about the scraping for bank website because it's mostly private, right? You have to like log into your own bank account. It's not like I can log in and see your stuff. So they probably don't really care too much in the sense of scraping their exact website. Kind of fun fact, they want to use mint.com. It's by Intuit. Yeah, you notice how like all that stuff is like, you know, if you use Mint, basically puts all your transactions. They actually do scrape all the information. If you use Mint, you have to do your login information. They actually go use your login information. Literally, for some places, if they don't have an API, literally go into that website as you and scrape the information directly from there, which is pretty cool. I was just like, oh, really? Like, you have to actually do that? No wonder it's a pain and stuff like that. I don't think it makes them any money. I think in the end, Intuit or Mint actually doesn't really gain the information, but they have a bunch of data now too, and it's a useful service for us. So anyway, one website that I'm thinking in particular is places like LinkedIn or Airbnb. It would be great to relist those parts other places, or LinkedIn, for example, to get this information. Interesting enough, they do some really cool stuff with their, well, cool stuff for them, not so cool for if you want to scrape it. They encrypt their tags and their attributes, which means like you can see that their attribute exists, but you can't tell like what is it supposed to mean. It's different each time. So it makes it difficult to actually understand how to scrape it and stuff like that. So those are some things that they do. You can also do like limiting. For example, I think someone on one of the other cohorts had put in like the module 2 channel, said that they tried scraping some stuff and their IP got banned because they scraped the website too quickly. And so those are things that can come to, and there's valid reasons why you want that as a website. You don't want the same person basically spamming your website, just scraping the information and taking up your resources compared to actual customers too. So there's valid reasons. But anyway, just know that scraping essentially is like the dirty business of getting data, okay? So how do we actually scrape? So we're gonna scrape with BeautifulSoup, which is basically a program which is amazing for Python. Basically, instead of looking at all this junk, right, which is awful, and imagine trying to find programmatically, like make your own for loops and recursive functions and stuff and try to determine all this stuff would be a huge pain. BeautifulSoup makes it beautiful, nice and easy, okay? And I like that they call it soup, like just kind of fun. But it's really simple. Make sure you install this. I think the curriculum kind of walks through it, so I'm not gonna go through the whole part. But basically, you're just gonna import BeautifulSoup just like this. Note that it is different from BS4. BS4 is the actual library, but you're gonna import BeautifulSoup. Just know that's a little difference. Request is another library that should be built into Python already. And basically request, I think we've seen this already with APIs, is that we can actually ask for the information. So we can request, for example, say, hey, give me the HTML document, and it will give you the HTML document from the website, just like as I put in like google.com or whatever, okay? And then RE, which is regular expressions, which I wish I was better with regular expressions. It's one of those things I say every year. I'm like, I'm gonna get better at regular expressions, and I don't. It's basically a way to find patterns within text. So you can say things like, for example, find something that looks formatted like an address. So every address you probably know is probably something like, a bunch of numbers, like 1 to like 5 numbers, and then a space, and then like maybe a street name with a comma, right? And so on. You can go through the whole, how an address looks like. Regular expressions basically allow you to specify those kind of things. So this allows us to find that text easier. But for the most part, for BeautifulSoup, we only have to do this part. Regular expressions are just helpful to help get that extra nitty-gritty detail, okay? So first step we have to do is actually go to the page. So we get the page by essentially just saying, okay, in this case, I made a little function called getSoup. This is something I made, but basically you just get the web page by saying request.get the URL. So you just pass the URL in here and you get the web page. Basically this passes the whole web page from request library. And then from that web page, you can actually use BeautifulSoup and say, okay, web page, whatever is in that web page. In this case, the web page, literally the content is going to be the full document itself. You're basically going to use the HTML parser, which basically creates a soup for you. So this right here will create a nice, beautiful soup from the document itself. So just to kind of show you what this happens is that, remember, this is calling, basically saying, okay, go ahead and use request to get this specific website. If you're wondering what this website looks like, this is Android Police. I picked just a random website I go to sometimes, okay? So you can see here, like they have the kind of article structure and stuff like this. And you can imagine, if you saw what Google was complicated, you can imagine how complicated all this stuff could be on here. But you might want to get like every single page, for example, to see what these different articles are, okay? So, oops, I ran this. I'm going to get the page, okay? So you can see the actual web page. This is just for us to see. And then the soup, which is what I really care about. So, oh, of course, I didn't import requests. Okay. And I should just run this now. Okay, so now I have the web page itself and the soup. The soup is what I really care about. But just to show you what the web page content looks like, if I just do page.content, it will give me this long string. You see, this is just literally a string. So for example, I think I can just go type. You can see it's, oh, bytes. Well, it's a string. Okay, just know it. And you can see it's bytes because it's got that B in front here. But basically, it's a huge string. It's just a bunch of stuff. And you can see, wouldn't this be amazing just to go for all yourself? This is the whole web page that we just looked at for a second. And so you can see it's ridiculously long, and I don't want to deal with that. So what we have instead is our soup, our beautiful soup. So it takes essentially that byte, that string, that long string of the whole document, right? And it basically creates this soup here. And you can see, first of all, when it prints out, it makes it nice and pretty versus if you look at the very top here. You can see, oh, you should also know that HTML doesn't care about spacings and stuff like that. It doesn't care about space at all. So that's why it's just all compacted. And so BeautifulSoup actually tries really hard to make it nice and pretty for you to look at. So you can see here that actually makes it a little bit easier for you to read, though you can see there's still quite a bit of extra information. We see here a list item and such. So What we can do though is actually use BeautifulSoup. This is an object now. So if I just do type, for example, and you see the soup, you can see it's a BeautifulSoup object. Okay. So what's nice is that we can actually take that object and do some operations on it. So the first thing we can do, for example, is, hey, I want to find everything that is an image. So what this will do is take the soup, which is all this stuff right here from the web page, and just find everything that is an image. Okay. And they'll save it as images. So run this part. Cool. Because remember, it's already downloaded. So it basically saved as this soup. So now I can say, okay, this images is basically going to be a list of all the different images or all the different tags that have the IMG. Okay. So you can see here, I can print out, and I'm going to go ahead and separate this out just to make it a little bit easier for us to read. You can see here, there's 75 total images, okay, that have this IMG part. Okay. And so if I wanted, for example, this very first image, you can see here, so our very first image here is image 0. And you can see basically this is the path right here. So if I were to actually copy this whole thing right here, make sure that's the actual one. Yep. I should be able to see the actual image. So you see, that is the image. So this is the image website right here. So basically this is how I can actually find this part. So I can also just print out, if I didn't want this whole tag, and probably I don't want, I just want the source, which is just this part. I can see if I print this out, and you can see that's the actual website. So you can see here, there's the whole, what's it called? The whole image itself. Okay, so this is how I can quickly go through images. For example, if I wanted to see, okay, well, let me get like the 40th image, right? And see here. Oh, you see, this is where I was talking about, like, it ends up right here. This is where I'm talking about, like, everyone's a little different on how they do this. So I actually have to go Android police here. And I believe I can go like this. And you can see there's the image right here. So note the reason I said that is because the source right here, if I were to print out this part right here, you can see that it ends with this is backslash. So basically this has to get appended. Basically the way this URL works, it says, oh, that's not an HTTPS, that's not an external website. So I'm just gonna go ahead and append this to the end of the website, which in this case, I know the website is android.com or androidpolice.com. Okay, so that's why I added it to the end. So you can see here, like all the different images, for example, all the different sources, and you can see more sources. If I wanted to do something else, I could have done something like, you know, let's see here, www.android. And yeah, so you can see here, this is the full website right here. And I could probably put like HTTPS. No, those. Here, there's a solution website. So if I came across, like, if I knew they were all like something separate, you can see here now I can go straight to those images. Okay. So again, this is what I'm talking about. Web scraping can be very, very dirty because you're going to have to figure out when this happens versus something else. Okay. So cool.
How come the images are so tiny versus when you're on the website?
Yeah. Part of the reason is because if you look really closely here, you'll see this part right here. So you'll see here, basically this adds extra parameters. This is more like website stuff. This adds extra parameters. For example, it says W equals 60 and H equals 60, which is gonna, as you can probably guess, width equals 60, H equals 60. So if I actually went ahead and let's say I copy this whole thing, now let's open up this part. And so you saw it was really tiny. If I go back to that web page and I got rid of those parameters, you would actually see it's, well, it's not that much bigger, but that would be its full size. But for example, if I did the same thing, let's say if I go, let's say make it like 10%, you can see here, makes it really tiny. So these are just extra parameters. So it's not really changing the image, it's actually just saying how you want to present the image itself. So the actual image is this guy right here, okay? So yeah, and you can see all this crazy stuff like this resizing and stuff like this. So what probably happens is that they take this actual website content, which is from this right here. I'll be going more detailed than I need to, but why not? So I see, can't do that because it's got this extra space. So basically it's coming down to the fact that this right here, this is a backslash. Well, if I replace all these percent at 2Fs, if I replace those all with the backslashes, I would get the original image eventually. And you can see how amazingly detailed everything can really be. And again, why web scraping is a lot of fun, but also can be mildly infuriating. So anyway, so yeah, just be aware of this kind of thing. And these are things you come across as you get more and more knowledge of this. Okay. Similar, just kind of show you some other examples. If I want to get all the divs, for example, I find all the little containers. You can see 471. If I want to see the first 10, you can see now as I have this list, for example, is that this first list, this is the first div right here, second div, and so on. Oh, this is actually a div right here. And then all of this is all within that first div up until this point. So you can see this right here is the first div, but it's nested within itself, if that makes sense. So if I do like div 0, you can see here, this is the whole div itself going in here. So if I wanted, for example, let's just go to 4 since I did the next example. You can see here, I have a div, and then within that div, because this is the whole div right here, there's a hyperlink, and there's also a heading in here. So for example, if I do find next siblings, I can also go to, oh, sorry, that would actually be hdiv 5, right? So you can see here, that's the next siblings. Okay, so you can navigate through the DOM this way. You can also, in a sense, go in deeper into this kind of deal. So you can find like the next children and stuff. The curriculum goes through a lot more detail of like all the different things you can do. But basically you can say, okay, let me find the div of, let's say I find this first div with certain properties, and I can dive deeper and deeper into say, okay, well, I care about this part, this part, this part, and so on. Okay. And then you can see here, for example, I can specify class. So for example, I only do this because I already know ahead of time. As I say, okay, find all the divs, right? Just like we said, find all div. However, with all the classes as a dictionary, the class is attribute that has post. Okay, so if I do this now, this will actually show the different things with the class post. Okay, so for example, if I knew everything was like a post of some sort, I can find the specific part, and then I could find the images of this, and I can find all the images of this specific article. So again, this is the way you can kind of dive in deeper and deeper into web scraping. And hopefully this wall of text doesn't intimidate you too much, because obviously the only way to know this, like how to, like, for example, well, how do I know it's class post? You're gonna have to explore it and kind of figure out, it's things like data exploration, but specifically about web scraping, okay? So that's kind of like a quick kind of thing about how web scraping works. Any questions on anything I kind of showed, or at least the concept of it? There's also, like I said, a lot more in the curriculum that can go into a lot more detail about how to find it deeper and deeper. Thumbs up, thumbs down, sideways. Okay, yeah, sideways, there's a lot of information. Hopefully you feel like, hopefully you get the concept, like, okay, I get the idea of this. There's obviously a lot of options, a lot of things you can do, and all this fun stuff. So I did want to show you a little bit, an example, since we have a little extra time. And if there's any questions, please let me know right now, so I can explain a little bit. But I do have a couple of repositories, and I should have had this before, but where's the adventure in that if I don't do it on the fly and see if I can find it right now. So let me show you one website that is a perfect example of why you want to do something. So this is a little fun thing. I know beer mile analysis. So does anyone know what the beer mile is? Okay, so I see some nods. And then a lot of confused looks like, what is this beer mile? So the beer mile basically, let's see if I have the actual website in here. The beer mile basically is the mile, but I think it's every lap you have to take a drink or a can of beer or 12 ounce. There's very strict rules on like what it qualifies as a beer mile, as this website will describe. But what's kind of cool is that I guess the person who came up with the beer mile actually collected all this information and actually showed, let's see if we do. It's not the best website. Let's say, there it goes. So you can basically collect information, for example, the different years, how many participants. So if I go to like this website or this entry right here, you can see tabular data. They even have like different, qualifications of the actual event. So say, oh, for example, max 4 ounce spillage. So maybe everyone who sees you here is that basically if you spill more than 4 ounces, maybe you're rejected. Vomit penalty, which we don't have to get into details about that. But the idea here is that there's all these different extra attributes along with the actual information. And you can see that this is pretty cool. It'd be great if there's an API for this. There is no API for this. It'd be great to see like what are the different attributes and stuff like that, like what qualified, how many people, like you can see the different timing here. Someone took a little bit longer to run that mile here to about 20 minutes versus 8:30. I think the fastest one's on here too. So you can do a whole bunch of really interesting data science with this information. But of course the data is not available, so you would have to scrape this data. So I only know this because I've done this before. You can also notice that the early stuff, for example, 1999, okay, you can see that there's not as much information versus over here. You can see there's extra notes. This table changes depending on what the website looks like. And there's not always these tags in here, things that change it. Is it created by a beer mile, user? For example, if I go to, I think I can go to up to 10 right here, and you can see how it all changes out. And you can see here, there's some extra information in here. And the really fun stuff is like when there's little images. I can't think of any in particular, like websites or whatever. So this would be a great candidate, for example. Oh, here's a good example. So like they show the beer and like there's different images and such. And oh, look, there's even like a video of like the actual like race itself. So you can do a whole bunch of, and now like grab all this information, put it all together. This is something I was kind of playing around with for a while. So this would be a great candidate of like why you would scrape the data and put it in more into a database like format. But of course you can see how messy this can really be. Is that it's not consistent. It's formatted differently right here. Some of these links might be broken or all this stuff. So things to look out. Other thing to note from this website is my favorite part, which is why I actually able to scrape it versus also doing that query every time, which is, it's great that they put in there. It's kind of janky. I don't know how it works. I haven't been able to figure it out, but you'll notice that there's numbers up here, and it turns out they just go sequentially, go up. However, there is an interesting part where like you can see 151. You're like, oh my gosh, is there 151 beer miles, 151,000 beer miles inputted in here? There aren't. There are not that many beer miles. I don't know why they changed it at some point, but for example, if I go to like 15,000, you can see, oh, there's no result. And this is true for like a good few thousand. But in the early days, they can see like we just counted up sequentially. For example, you can just go to 18 and then 19 going up and so on. So some kind of web scraping stuff for you guys. If a website ever goes like this, counting up by numbers, oh man, you are golden, because eventually you just go through the numbers and just loop over and go over and over and over until you find that number. If you were ever building a website, or if you know any of your friends that you really care about who are building a website and they use numbers, tell them to stop right then and not do that, because this is how people get scraped really badly in the sense of private information. There's a reason why you can't go to facebook.com and then go to your private profile and it'll say like not found or whatnot or whatever it shows on private. And it's because basically there's credentialing going through. Well, if you have the website only count by numbers, for example, YouTube does this. So YouTube is actually a great example. If you go to a YouTube, I don't know if you guys ever paid attention to this, but if you go to a YouTube website, let's just go to this random one right here, is that you can see here this number right here. This is actually a number translated into, I believe, 64 different possibilities. It depends. Basically, you have capital letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. And so it ends up being like what, 26 times 20, or 26 plus 26, 52 plus 10 numbers, so 60. It's probably around 64-ish different, characters you can have. So each one of these parts is basically 64 times 64 times 64 times 64 times 64. And this is basically a really, really long number. But you're like, wait, Victor, you said you're not supposed to count by numbers, right? You shouldn't ever do that. And you're right, you shouldn't. But YouTube's pretty smart and basically makes most of these URLs not actually valid. And so basically it has a huge number of URLs, but only uses a very small segment of them. And basically the point is that you randomly guessing a number, you could spend all the time trying to guess these random numbers and you would never reach an actual video. This is actually how unlisted videos work. So if you ever come across an unlisted video, basically all you need is a URL. You just need to know this number. Well, you can technically find unlisted videos. However, can anyone do that? No, because it's so ridiculously sparse is that you can never find those videos, stuff like that. So this is the right way to do it. The wrong way to do it is you count sequentially, like the beer mile. The beer mile does not do this correctly, but beer mile probably doesn't care because, I mean, do they really care about hiding any data? There's nothing private in this case. For the record, which I don't know, maybe, well, I don't know if this shared is too much, but just to say, I know someone who came across something like this, and it was private information, not private information, basically they were releasing like books that you had to buy, essentially, like PDFs and stuff like that. And they counted sequentially. Well, it turns out, it's like, well, that's interesting. That's a number on there that seems to be a date. I wonder if I could increase, oh, yep, I increased that number. I mean, my friend increased that number. And it happened across that they came across a PDF they shouldn't be able to access. And just to say that if you want to do that, you could basically get a lot of information in that way. So this could be really useful, whether they do it on purpose or not. Also, always abide by the law, just to make that really clear. But scraping data, it can make your life a lot easier. So pay attention to those kind of patterns going through. So that is one way to scrape. Another one I have in here, which is, I think I talked to Thomas about this earlier today, because I said how awful it was. I think it's hilarious still, is that I built a scraper for scraping some Olympics data, which, you know, probably a little bit better than the beer mile, but a little more relevant to most people. But what was interesting is that I built this scraper, and I'll kind of show you a little bit of this notebook of where you can scrape stuff. And I use BeautifulSoup, so you can kind of go through this and see the concept of how this works. And basically I was putting into different source paths and stuff like this. So I was getting information about the sport or the, people, individuals and stuff, and basically gathering all this information from this specific website here, which, let's see if this actually how this looks now. Basically from the website, you can basically go through like different athletes and stuff like this. I won't go into it, but you know what the Olympics looks like. So you can see here, basically, I'm building functions too to make it more easier, or for loops, I should say, for loops to make it a little bit easier to scrape through multiple parts and make sure, for example, if I have an error, I don't actually like complete the whole thing. Because most time you turn on your scraper, you let it run for a while. If you have a bunch of errors, you're gonna have to stop it. Like you run it for an hour, like, cool, I'm gonna go step away for a couple hours. And it turns out like after you turned it on 5 minutes ago, like 5 minutes into it, it stopped working because there was an error. These are things that you have to kind of consider. Well, what was really fun about this is I was pretty close to being done with the actual scraper itself to get the data from the website. Turned out that was the easiest way to get the Olympics data. Fun fact is that I was like, okay, cool, I'm done. For tomorrow, I'll just go and turn it on and run the scraper, you know, let it go through a few hours and get the information. And I'm like, sweet, like awesome, I get all this information. I've been working, you know, for quite some time getting this. Literally the next day when I went to go run it, the website changed and all the code that I had written was completely irrelevant because they set a update to the website that no longer followed the format I had. And so my web scraper was completely useless. So these are the kind of things that you can kind of come across. Yes, I'm glad you guys laughed because it was kind of infuriating, but also just like unbelievable that it was literally the next day. So again, you're kind of like in the Wild West when you do web scraping. It can be a lot of fun. It's a lot of like puzzle kind of work. It can also be a lot of hard work. And sometimes you can come across things where you're like a dead end. We're like, oh, wow, I thought I was doing something and it turned out things completely changed. So note that that's kind of all the web scraping stuff and a couple of examples. So cool. All right, awesome. So any last questions? Now I kind of showed you a couple examples and other kind of things to consider. Go ahead, Giovanna.
Well, very quick question.
Mm-hmm.
As you were saying, like it's the Wild West, I was wondering if are there any regulations or ethical grounds for what you can do or not? Or are we free to scrape whatever that is out there?
I will say don't hack the Pentagon. They don't like that kind of stuff. But obviously abide by laws, you know, like clearly, like if you break a law, like someone can come after you. So one thing to always consider with data, even if you're not breaking the law, but it might be something, for example, going into like, let's say someone has a privacy leak and it's like, oh, well, they, you know, let's say something dumb like the beer mile, for example. The beer mile actually had some interesting, they talked about a few things going through is that they actually removed some people's names because they said, oh, I don't want to be associated with that part. So always be in respect of people's privacy. Privacy is a weird one, especially in the US where it's not super clear exactly what is private and what isn't. So just be aware of those kind of things. Privacy is a whole other part, just of data science in general, but there aren't like necessarily rules other than the laws itself. Don't try to break, like if you're trying to get into a place, like get the data, the first thing to do is just ask the website if they, you know, if they have a vast amount of data, like if you have gigabytes of data, ask them and they might have some way to access it. If that's the only way for them to scrape, if you're scraping it and it's all publicly available, you can see it all there, you can log in. Like if I can go to on this website and see it, for the most part, you're pretty free, like, you know, obviously I'm not a lawyer, but you're pretty free to just like get the information. Essentially you're seeing it, at least according to US privacy law. But be aware that if you come across something that you really shouldn't be having access to, be kind of aware that you shouldn't be diving into people's medical records, even if you can actually see people's medical records, things like that. So, because then law can actually apply to you. One thing though to consider, like more technical reason, is be aware of how quickly you scrape your website. So there's ways you can basically, with like Scrapy, SCRAPY, and other tools, you can basically automate the scraping, which includes like, things like, Amazon and stuff like this. You can use those kind of tools. Those actually don't usually have as much of an issue because websites can actually track how often a URL is clicking on different things and different criteria and different things that people do that are more robotic like. Kind of similar to the sense like, when you see like, am I a robot? And you have a little checkbox or a CAPTCHA, kind of like that idea. And they can, what they'll sometimes do is they'll limit you. They'll say, okay, you can only like say, hey, this website or this URL or this IP address keeps going to our website constantly. Like we need to go like, okay, we're going to ban this IP address for the next, like hour. So that doesn't flood up all our traffic. Because if you were someone who malicious, maybe another competing company, you could possibly create these kind of things where you essentially have bots or, essentially scrapers that will continuously go through it constantly and basically overpower the website instead of regular users. So they'll limit and stuff like that. And so if you ever come across a limit, for the most part, you can probably just start up in another, like, few minutes later, at most maybe an hour. If you're banned for life, that's really rare. Because if that's true, they just go to the new IP address. So there's ways around that too. But things you kind of consider is that just more, if you scrape too quickly, is that the website might say, hey, like you might be malicious, so I'm gonna block you for a while. And just be kind of aware that your scraper can't go on indefinitely. Or you add some extra like spacing between your time with like sleep or there's other more advanced ways you can do it too. Okay. Cool. All right. Good question though. Anything else you guys are interested in or have any questions? Cool. All right. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing and I guess I should stop recording.